On this video, I'm going to give you a glossary of a big list of board gaming terminology and words. If you are new to the hobby or just getting started and you're wondering what on earth we talk about sometimes when we keep talking about board games, then this is the video for you. Hi, I'm Luke Hector from the Broken Meeple, and this is my board gaming glossary video. If you like what you see and I've earned your subscription, please click the subscribe button in the bottom of the video, as well as click the bell for notifications on future content, including live streams. Any important websites or subject matters covered in this video will be provided, of course, as links in the description below. So what's the purpose of this video? Well, as content creators and even just as gamers in general, we tend to get a little bit carried away when we're explaining games to people, particularly if you're new to the hobby. We let board gaming terminology get out of control. We take it for granted and don't realize that a lot of you out there haven't heard of these terms before, or are not going to understand them the first time you hear them. Yet you'll hear us constantly spout off about worker placement and dexterity and tableau building and deck building and all sorts of other weird terms that at first are probably going to overwhelm you in terms of its scope and might put you off the hobby if we're not careful. It takes a lot of skill to be able to teach games to new players, and of course board gaming terminology is one thing we like to avoid, or if we have to use it, we like to explain it in as much detail as we can. So I'm going to give you as big a list as I can of some board gaming terms that we tend to use very often. I'm going to try and split it into 3 categories, although don't take these categories too strictly if you can. The first category will be types of board games. So this can include gateway games, Amerithrash games, Euro games, that kind of thing. The second category will be specifically on mechanics. Now some people might interchange the first category and the second category, but I'm talking about specific mechanics that make up a game. And for the third category, it will kind of be a catch-all, an other if you say, but it's more attributable to people and gamers in general, like character traits, rather than anything else. Of course, this is not a comprehensive list of every single term that exists for board games. There may be terms out there I've never even heard of, or some terms that I take for granted myself. This is just meant to be as big a list as I can without making the video go to 6 hours trying to explain every single one. But hopefully this video will be of use to you, and if it is, then please feel free to share it out on social media so that other new gamers may be able to see it. But for now, let's get a move on. You may have heard the term 4X mentioned with a lot of big sprawling epic games. Well, the X is basically EX, and they stand for expand, exploit, explore, and exterminate. These are typically given to the big epic games where you control a faction or an army, a race, that kind of thing. And with this, the game mechanics involve you doing those 4 X's throughout. So you will expand your territory. You may start off in one particular home base and then you expand across the map into other areas. Explore. You don't know what's out there. There may be planets you have yet to see. There may be land that you've got to uncover. And so by exploring, you're discovering new things. There's exploit, which is basically related to gaining resources, exploiting a planet's resource, exploiting an indigenous population maybe, getting various resources to build your ships, to upgrade your civilization, whatever. And then exterminate. Do I need to explain that one? Explain! Your innate desire to kill everybody else on the table. The most well-known game of this category is Twilight Imperium 4th edition, but you may also find more real-world type scenarios such as the ever-popular Civilization. The next 2 are particularly important to know, and the first I'm going to discuss is Amerithrash games or Ameritrash games. The 2 terms are interchangeable, it's just players didn't like the negative connotation of the word Ameritrash and so tend to say Amerithrash now in order to describe these. These originated primarily from American designers, and typically the mechanics of such games are woven to describe a very strong theme and narrative, a story if you will. So it's less about the mechanics and how well the decision making works and more about immersing you into this other world. Think escapism. So a game based on the Battlestar Galactica sci-fi series is going to be introducing elements such as the Cylons and the Raiders and trying to put you in those characters' shoes from the TV series in order to make the game more immersive. Now these tend to have a higher degree of luck than most other strategy games out there and typically involve a fair amount of player interaction and sometimes direct conflict. That's not to say these games are complete luck fests, but typically you will get more randomness appearing in these games. However, if you want to build a strong narrative and a really strong theme, sometimes a bit of randomness is in order. Examples of Amerithrash games could include Forbidden Stars or anything particularly from the Arkham Horror series. Next up is Eurogames. You can almost think of this as the opposite to an Amerithrash game, but Eurogames tended to originate from Germany and then have spread out all over the world, but these tend to be characterized as very strategic games with in-depth mechanics, less caring about the theme or caring about telling an immersive story, and more just coming up with different ways to test the brain, to interweave lots of different mechanics, which I'll go into more detail later, in order to create a very thinking man's game. Examples of classic Euro games could include Coimbra and Five Tribes. Now for some more simpler, less broad terms, asymmetrical games. Asymmetrical games are where players start off different from other players. This could be based on the faction that they're playing, such as an alien race. It could be decided by player powers. So player red has a power that allows them to harvest resources twice as fast as any other player. Another player may have a power that allows them to skip turns in the sequence and do other things. It doesn't matter what the power is or what the context is, the key aspect is that each player starts off differently from everybody else. Classic examples of asymmetrical powers being used in games could include Cosmic Encounter as well as Architects of the West Kingdom. Light, medium and heavy weight games. We use the term weight to describe how complex a game may be. A light game would be considered to be relatively luck-based, not include a huge amount of mechanics, relatively simple, suitable for families and so forth. Whereas a heavyweight game would involve lots of interweaving in-depth mechanics, be incredibly technical, be fairly long in terms of its length, and certainly be more reserved for people who are more used to board games in general. An example of a light game could include Ticket to Ride, whereas an example of a heavy game could include On Mars. Brainburner. We tend to use this as a relatively loose term to describe heavyweight games where by playing such a game your brain is likely to be tired after playing it. This could apply to Ameritrash games as well as Euro games, but the main idea of it is that when playing it, the decisions you're having to make, the tension throughout the game, the technical nature of it, the complexity of it is so high that after playing it you'll feel like, whew, that was an experience, but I'll have a little break before I play my next game. Now the term brain burner is going to be a very subjective one and usually determined by the player themselves, but two games that I would consider to be brain burners would include Vinyos as well as Tricarion. Gateway games. Now gateway games is used very commonly within us in the board gaming industry, and this is what we tend to use to describe entry level games. Now there is a bit of a negative connotation to the word which some people don't like, where they seem to believe that a gateway game is implying that this is for people who are a little bit, shall we say, less smart, and they're not necessarily going to be able to cope with the heavier games. It is not intended to be a negative term in any way, it's simply just to describe games that are entry level to the hobby. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to play a gateway game when starting the hobby, but it does mean that if I don't know who you are, have no idea what your board game experience is, and I hear that you have never played a board game ever in your life, I would probably use such a gateway game in order to just test the waters, shall we say, and see whether you enjoy the hobby. If it turns out that you completely master the gateway game and you want something tougher, then you simply say, and then we put you onto something tougher. But of course, if you're just getting into gateway games and you need a bit of a slower, a less steep learning curve, shall we say, then gateway games are ideal. Examples of classic gateway games that are used to this day include Ticket to Ride and Catan. Legacy games. This is a newer term than most in the board gaming world, and it's to describe a game where components are actively destroyed as the game progresses. Usually these tend to be very thematic and very heavy story-driven games, where you will start off usually with a blank slate even, and barely any idea of what the plot is, and then as you go through the game, the story unfolds into more detail. But what you are doing is that you are actively destroying components, sticking stickers on the board to add new rules, uncovering new things, opening up envelopes. Essentially, a legacy game is played through usually once only, and then you have this brand new board that will look completely different to everybody else's. But the side effect is that the chances are it's the only time you will play the game, because you now know the story and the secrets that the game holds ahead of time. Two of the more popular legacy games that exist today are Pandemic Legacy, whether it's Season 1 or Season 2, and Clank Legacy. Microgames are given to those which have very few components and fit into a small box. However, the dimensions of a microgame are not fixed and set in standard, so for somebody a microgame might be yay big, and for some other people a microgame might have to be this tiny little thing here. But it's subjective, but generally we're talking about few components and very small boxes, or very small storage space on your shelf, shall we say. The best examples for this include Love Letter and Mintworks. Thematic games. The term thematic is used to describe how well the theme of the game is evoked by way of art, components, mechanics, or the story within. For example, a Lord of the Rings based game would need to make you feel like you're in the Lord of the Rings universe. So the art would have to look like something out of a J.R.R. Tolkien novel. The characters would have to be the characters from the Lord of the Rings lore. The art itself would need to be picturesque and colourful and can't just be represented by cubes, for example. The biggest component of a thematic game tends to be the story narrative. However, art and components and everything else, and even the mechanics, cannot be left behind. It all comes together to make one package. Best examples of some thematic games out there include The Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth and Tainted Grail. Filler games are those typically used to describe games that can be played within a relatively short space of time. They're quick to learn, quick to play, and they're usually used as a bridging gap between, say, arriving at a club and playing a fairly heavy game. Typically, these tend to be used when starting a night off. You're waiting for people to turn up to the club, not everybody's here yet, and you're thinking, well, shall we just play something small and quick while we wait for them to turn up? And this game usually should take no more than 30 minutes to play. Of course, if it can take less time, the better. Some good examples of filler games that exist out there include Point Salad and The Crew: The Quest for Planet 9. Sometimes we use abbreviations to describe certain games, and TCG or CCG is another very popular one. Trading card game or collectible card game. They're essentially used to describe the same thing. This is a game where you will buy packs of cards in order to play the game as were. You may buy a specific faction or a specific race, but then what will generally happen is you will have a starter deck, which is a deck that everybody can buy and gets them on the road. You know, it gets them started in the game. But then in order to acquire more cards, you usually have to buy what are called booster packs. These packs come in sets where there may be 1,000 cards in a set, but they're sold in booster packs of, say, 15 cards. You will buy said booster packs and they will contain a random assortment of cards, usually split out by rarity, so commons, uncommons and rare cards, and you will use these booster packs to add to your collection, build whatever deck you're using, and play the game. There is a massive amount of randomness in these packs that you are buying though. You are never guaranteed to get the cards that you are after. It's more the surprise factor of, I've opened up a pack, oh cool, I got this guy, this is amazing. It does mean that you may have to spend quite a lot of money to get all the cards in the set, but that's just a feature of it. The very best example of such a CCG is Magic: The Gathering. On a slight segue from CCGs, we have LCGs, known as living card games. This is kind of a new spin-off to a CCG format, where similarly you will start off usually with a starter set and then buy more cards to add to your collection in order to play the game. The difference, the key difference between this and CCGs is that the packs of cards you buy are fixed. They will release more packs as the game progresses through its life cycle, but you know what cards are in the pack. There's a fixed number number of cards, there's a fixed quantity, a fixed detail of what cards are in there. So you know what you're getting. There is no randomness. There is therefore no rarity to the cards either. A particular pack will have 10 different cards and 3 of each card. You know what you're getting, so nobody's on a different level than you if they have bought the same pack. This will still cost you a fair bit of money to get those packs, but it's particularly well versed to those who just want to expand the game at their own pace and not have to be caught out by some people having better cards than them just because they got lucky with booster packs. Two of the best examples of living card games to this day is Arkham Horror, the card game, as well as Marvel Champions. And finally for this video, dungeon crawls. This is a little bit of a subjective term as well, but typically it involves you and a bunch of players going into a dungeon or a predetermined area, shall we say, usually fighting monsters, gathering treasure, leveling up in experience. They typically are adventure-based games. If you know anything about the Dungeons and Dragons roleplay game that is usually played by other people, that's a classic example of a dungeon crawl. Your band of adventurers, a barbarian, a dwarf, an elf, whatever, go into a dungeon, a cave, a sorcerer's tower, kill some monsters, goblins and dragons, find treasure, loot, magic items. It's that kind of setting. A key aspect of a dungeon crawl usually involves developing your character through experience. As you play multiple games, your character will gain experience, and this will be spent to acquire new skills, acquire better items, level up statistics, like say your strength stat. It goes up from 10 to 12, for example. And this usually takes place through a story-based narrative, but that's not necessarily always the case. Two well-known dungeon crawls include Descent: Journeys in the Dark and Imperial Assault. Originally, I was going to do one video to do all the terms that I can. However, it was discovered during filming that this took some considerable time. So I've decided to split this into 3 videos, one for each category. So that's it for this video in the Board Game Glossary series. If you like what you see, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and check out my other social media platforms or my Patreon campaign. For now, I'm going to get on and start recording the other videos in this series, so thank you for watching. If you want to see other content from me, you can check out my Broken Meeple show, or you can check out my recent Project Elite review. That's it for me, take care, and remember, it's only a game.